Okay, good evening. My name is Holly Miller, and I'm the Acting Dean of Libraries here at the Evans Library, and I just want to welcome you to the Evans Library and to our final after-hours event of the semester. I see libraries as a place of inquiry, learning, expression, and collaboration, and so I think this is a perfect venue to have the important discussion that we're about to have about climate change and climate on the eve of Earth Day. We have, in addition to the wonderful presenters and moderators that you'll be able to experience in a few minutes, we have posters up along the walls from our students, our senior students in the sustainability program. So take some time maybe after the program and look at some of the work that the students here at Florida Tech are doing. So with no further ado, I will introduce to you, oh wait, I do have a further ado, I'm sorry. As I said, this is the final after-hours event of the semester, but we do this about once a month, and it's open to the public. If this is your first time here and you want to know about future events, there's a sign-in sheet somewhere over there, and please sign up with your email and you'll get notifications of our events when they start in fall. Okay, now with further ado, I would like to introduce our first moderator of the evening, Dr. Gordon Patterson, professor in the School of Arts and Communications.
Let's see if I can hit this button.
Yes.
First, it is an honor and a pleasure to be here this evening and get to speak to you as a historian. But I need to tell you that the library is about to undergo a terrific experiment for the first time in Florida Tech's history. It's going to be open during finals week 24 hours a day. So you're looking at an early candidate in sleep deprivation exercise with the librarians. They will literally be here all the time. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here. I am a historian of science. I specialize on vector-borne diseases. So I'll say a little bit about mosquitoes and how that may be changed at the end. But I thought it would be appropriate to frame our discussion this evening with some general thoughts about the first Earth Day. And when I was thinking about that, you can put a lot of dates up there. April 22nd, 1970, when Gaylord Nelson and a couple of other people had called for an Earth Day because of something that happened on January 28, 1969, the Santa Barbara oil spill, which galvanized in California opinion about our tenuous relationship with the world around us. Or maybe it was June 16, 1962, when in the New Yorker magazine, the first third of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring appeared. Or perhaps, to this historian, the first Earth Day was November 24th, 1859. That's the day that Darwin's Origin of Species was published. And what the Origin of Species, I would argue, presents us with is, in this New Yorker cartoon, having completed the formation of the earth, on the seventh day the Lord rested, and then on the eighth day the Lord said, "Let there be problems," and there were problems. And the problems that appeared, quite frankly, are what I think, as a historian, is at the core of the reason that we tonight are kicking off Earth Day here at Florida Tech, the incredible success of our species in reproducing. This is data from the U.S. Census Bureau that has a speculative page. In 10,000 BC, which is roughly the point that anthropologists and historians fix upon as the agricultural revolution, domestication of animals, agriculture by seeds, maybe 1 to 10 million of our species by 1 CE, somewhere between 170 and 400 million. But the real jump in this moment of that exchange between old and new world of roughly 500 million people. And then in 1804, the moment that we crossed the point to 1 billion, and 123 years passed before we reached 2 billion in 1927. And then 33 years passed before we reach 3 billion. And then in 2017, 7.49 billion of our species, with a speculated number of 11.2 in the year 2100. If there were only 100 million of us, or even if there were only 1 billion of us, the problems that we face as a species, the problems that our planet faces, would be substantially different. It is because of that that we are here, in some sense, wrestling with what another date that you might want to put into your book, Garrett Hardin's path-breaking essay in 1968, The Tragedy of the Commons. If you're not familiar with that essay, the best thing you can do tonight, perhaps, is go and download it and read it. Because what the Tragedy of Commons raises is this question of individuals in relationship to that common space that is our home, whether it be a field where we have sheep or whatever, or the planet on which we live. And the problem that we face, that what may be an advantage to a single person, the net increase of their livelihood, the consequences that holds when every individual works from that myopic, narrow perspective and takes and takes and takes. And the tragedy of the commons is that the commons ceases. And the tragedy of the commons then raises the question, how do we do what Ken Linderman and 100+ students in our sustainability program, what our campus is trying to do through our LEED certification, how do we find a way to sustain a population in a common that will not grow large, will not become something any broader or any more beautiful than it is at this moment in time. So, what can we do? And this is some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. What we can do is first think and research, and think and research, and think and research some more. It matters what you and you and you and you do in the laboratory, in the classroom, and it matters even more importantly, and that is why I'm looking forward to my colleague Heidi Edwards, who's the head of our communication program's remarks. It is not enough to know. Knowing must be wedded to communicating. We have an obligation to make an argument that is cogent, coherent, and compelling. And if we do not do that, then we will find ourselves standing, looking at a world that is markedly different than the world that we were born into. I promised myself I would say something about mosquitoes, something that I do know about. Mosquitoes are a remarkable species. They're the senior partner in this relationship. They've been around for at least 250 million years, and we've been around a much shorter time. There are more than 3,500 species of them, but I've been watching the movement of species of mosquitoes from places that normally they weren't. Aedes albopictus arrives in America in 1986 in used tires. Aedes aegypti, which is a villainous of a mosquito, vector of yellow fever, dengue, chikungunya, and Zika, arrived in the New World, perhaps in the slave ships in 1600. It arrived in California on the 16th of June in 2016. We moved it from the southeast to California. It's now outside Fresno, in Marin County, and in LA County. The virus Zika appeared in 1947. In the period from 47 to 2006, there were only 14 clinically diagnosed cases. And then on Yap Island, 11,500 kilometers away from Uganda, where that disease was first identified by Alec Haddow, 50% of the population showed the antibodies of Zika. A year later, 70% in French Polynesia. And last year, the Brazilian Communicable Disease Authority said we have anywhere between 500,000 and 1.5 million cases of Zika. Puerto Rico, 28,000 last year. Florida, 200 locally transmitted. This is part of an effort of globalization of viruses and insects which were tropical and subtropical that are moving into temperate zones. Does this matter? It does matter. It matters because without our intervention, the harm will come to us. A cartoon that I grew up with, Pogo, that most of you younger people don't know. Pogo. Ah, Pogo. The beauty of the forest primeval gets me in the heart. It gets me in the feet, porcupine. It is hard walking on all this stuff. Yep, son, we met the enemy, and he is us. 7.3 billion people out there. We have to go out and reach a handful of those people. The poet William Butler Yeats puts it very well. Education is not about filling a pail. It's about lighting a fire. And tonight we have to begin lighting fires in people in which they think, they question, and we have to listen. It's not enough being correct. It has to be followed by the persuasion of lifting people and causing them to see the value of science and the value of what we in universities do. It is our life, it is our responsibility, and yes, I am passionate because science is what has made us different than the squirrels and the chipmunks and the raccoons that are out there. And without any further ado, I'm not going to give you a chipmunk, raccoon, or a squirrel. I'm going to give you one of my good colleagues. Thank you very much. We'll have a lot of discussion, I hope.
Good evening. All right. Let's see, here it is. Let's go ahead and talk to you a little bit about climate science tonight. Hopefully this will be a whirlwind tour of climate science. All right, the New Yorker's in vogue tonight, apparently, because I stole this image out of the New Yorker, actually. This is from a late December 2015 article. I'm not sure how many folks read it. A fascinating article. You see in the background that nice sort of Art Deco appearance of South Beach. The colors complemented, and actually you see some water inundation at the beach. But actually, if you read the article, the gist of it ultimately is this idea of the basically clear weather flooding that's starting to go on in a bunch of cities along the east coast of the United States as a result of sea level rise. Okay, and Miami is considering not just Miami Beach, but the city of Miami are actually getting ready to invest about a half a billion dollars in taxpayer money to raise the streets and buy some pumps. So hope somebody's keeping tabs. Alrighty, so weather versus climate, one of my favorite. That's Bambi versus Godzilla up there, and so this idea, we've all heard the cliche that if you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes. But unfortunately, I'm not sure as many of you have seen the corollary, but if you don't like the climate, you got to move. And so unfortunately, this may be an issue in the not so distant future. And so let's talk about that a little bit tonight. So a little bit of physics. I promise no equations really, but the idea that how you might disturb the radiative balance of the Earth-atmosphere system is important. So how would you do that, right? Well, if you're into cartoons or little pictures, that means you have a sun out there. Basically, that is the incoming radiation from the sun. And then you have basically the Earth. It actually absorbs the solar radiation, at least part of it anyway. And then it reemits some of that radiation back to space. And on about an annual time scale, the two should be in pretty much radiated equilibrium and should equal out. They should be in balance. Okay? And that's the idea. So how might you disrupt this balance? Well, interestingly enough, it's not as complicated as you think. There's only 3 really basic ways you can do that. You can change the incoming solar radiation, say changing the Earth's orbit or the output of the sun. You can change how much solar radiation is reflected. Like we know that as albedo, so clouds play a role in that. Important. And then finally, you can actually alter the long wave of the radiation, basically, that's emitted by the Earth back out into space. That's it. 3 basic ways of changing the radiation balance of the Earth-atmosphere system. So what have we known? I know I'm nervous. Why I like to walk around. So what do we know? What have we known? So we've known for a long time, it turns out, that a doubling of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would add about 4 watts to every square meter of the surface of the Earth 24/7. We've known this for a long time. Doing that would make the surface warmer. Shocker. And finally, this was known even before light bulbs were invented. And we can thank a colleague of mine, John Tyndall, and some of his colleagues back in 1863. This is old news, folks. Old news. Okay? So where are we today in terms of carbon dioxide? I've got a couple figures here. This is the last 4 years at Mauna Loa. This is the last 50 years at Mauna Loa. You can even see the upward trend in carbon dioxide, basically. Even in the 4-year trace, we've surpassed 400 parts per million recently, a milestone in the context of carbon dioxide loading of the atmosphere. Okay? If anybody's curious about this oscillation, That's the Earth's atmosphere exchanging carbon dioxide due to photosynthesis, basically with vegetation. So during winters, basically, the vegetation, the terrestrial sphere, exhales CO2 to the atmosphere, and during the photosynthetically active summers, it pulls it back in. So that's your thing. All right. And so what do we know about atmospheric CO2? We know basically that, not in addition to CO2, but methane and nitrous oxide are at values not seen in 800,000 years. We know this unequivocally. I'll talk about that in a minute. And we also know that carbon dioxide concentrations, essentially modern day concentrations, are basically about 40% larger than pre-industrial. If you follow this back in time, I love this. You can actually go to the website here. This is actually modern day. This is past. This is about 1 million years here. And what do you see here? Well, there's about a 1 million year period here. Again, present day, past. You can see this neat little oscillation in carbon dioxide. And it turns out that over the last 1 million years, how do we know this? This is little gas bubbles, the atmosphere, trapped in the ice. They core the ice in the Antarctic, and they look at the basically concentrations of different gases in that trapped air. And what do we know? It's been tightly bound over 1 million years. During cold periods, about 180 parts per million in the atmosphere. We call these glacials. And during interglacials, about 280 parts per million. These are the warm periods. So the background concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere during warm periods are around 280 parts per million. So where are we today? That's where we are now. Well outside anything we've seen over 1 million years, over 400 parts per million. Just to give you perspective. Perspective is important, clearly. Okay. If you pair it up, so we're looking at now the same trace in carbon dioxide and the Antarctic ice core. If you line up temperature, again, for that same 1 million years, you can see that these two are tightly coupled. As carbon dioxide goes up, so does temperature. As it goes down, so does temperature. Colleague at Penn State, Richard Alley, calls CO2 the big control knob for good reason. So, did you know that? And in reference to what we just saw, that the largest global temperature variations that are known are those associated with what I just showed you, this glacial to interglacial transition. Okay? And we know its cause, it's orbital. And ultimately, unfortunately, we should be cooling as a result today. Interesting. The global temperature change across the glacial to interglacial transition should be about 5 degrees C, again, globally. Okay? You compare that with the IPCC projections, the upper end, albeit, projections of temperature change, we're looking at something comparable, approaching 5 degrees C, possibly, on the planet. But we're looking at 200 years instead of what the glacial to interglacial transitions take, which are about 10,000 years to get that 5 degrees C global temperature change. These are important information. Volcanic activity, fascinating. Turns out that the annual carbon dioxide emissions from humans are more than 100 times greater than that from volcanoes in present day. We know this. I'll talk more about that in a second. And it turns out that only the most explosive volcanic eruptions, they put their aerosols in the stratosphere, impact climate. They impact 1 or 2 years, and it's again cooling. Fantastic. So, did you know that the solar output's been remarkably constant since we've been seeing the sun, especially from space, from satellites, in the last 30 or 40 years? There's been no significant long-term trends in the solar output. In fact, it's decreased slightly over the last 3 decades. And so, again, we should be cooling. This is disconcerting. In just 100 years, the global temperatures have risen from nearly the coldest to the warmest of the entire Holocene record. This is phenomenal. Let me show you. So if we look at some paleo proxy data combined with some observations at the end, let me highlight a little bit. So that's 10,000 years. This is basically modern day on the right. This is 10,000 years ago to the left, a little longer than that on that figure. If you go out and also off the figure, this is the recent glacial. Let me walk you through it. These are temperature anomalies. There we are coming out of the last, basically, glacial period. And we end up in this, what we call early Holocene thermal maximum. Okay, this warm period about 5 to 10,000 years ago. And then we've been slowly cooling over the last several thousand years here, orbital. And all of a sudden, here we are today, at the end of that record. Okay, pretty amazing, right? So there's the thermal optimum, and there we are today. Just, again, perspective. So you might ask, Dr. Lazarus or Dr. L, where is the heat going? Well, that's an interesting question. Many of you probably know the answer. The ocean warming dominates the increase in the energy stored in the atmosphere ocean system, basically, and accounts for more than 90% of the total energy basically accumulated essentially the last 40 years. You like pictures instead? Well, it's supposed to be pink, but it's not apparently. Anyway, there's a picture of where most of the heat's going. Thank goodness, actually, it's not going directly into the atmosphere, it turns out, but it's going into the ocean. That means the oceans are probably expanding a little bit, thermal expansion. So, hence my next slide. Did you know that the rate of sea level rise since the mid-19th century has been larger than the mean rate during the previous 2,000 years? That's a quote right out of the AR5, the latest IPCC report. Pretty spectacular information on sea level rise. And over the last 110 years or so, global mean sea level, again, global mean sea level has risen about 0.2 meters or 8 inches between friends. Global mean sea level will continue to rise, or is projected to continue to rise, actually, and rise at levels beyond what we've been witnessing in the last 40 years. Why is that? Because the oceans are still rapidly warming, and the ice sheets are melting, and glaciers are melting. This is a no-brainer, okay? If we go back and look at a sea level record, some of this is paleo data. As you get into more modern times on a figure like this, interestingly enough, it goes from paleo data to tide gauge data to satellite altimetry. So it's a combination. So I can divide the figure up basically like this. And these are observations on this side. This is the last 100 years essentially of global sea level rise. And these are the projections. So what are we looking at? Obviously, we're all Florida residents. This is something we should be concerned about, sea level rise. And we're looking at, on the upper end anyway, something on the order of a meter by 2100. That is a problem. Of course, the other problem here is that, unfortunately, all sea level is local. So sea level rise is complicated. The warm colors are greater values, and the cool colors are actually sea level falls in some regions. Florida looks like about 2 or 3 millimeters per year right now. The global average in the last 25 years is about 3 millimeters per year, but there are portions of the globe, say the tropical West Pacific, that have phenomenal sea level rises. We're looking at 15 millimeters per year. These folks are actually facing real issues with water levels coming up on some of these islands here in the tropical West Pacific. Spectacular. Okay, did you know that in addition to all this talk about the ocean and the atmosphere, there are other changes we've detected in the system? Changes in the water cycle, precipitation, snow cover, ice cover, and change in climate extremes. I went online, I went to NOAA, they still have the data online, thank goodness, and I was able to pull some interesting data. Let me highlight what I pulled on here. If you look at record high maximums and minimums, and you compare them to the record record low minimums and maximums, basically, you'll see essentially these numbers don't add up. In fact, if you add the two record maxes to the record lows, basically, you get about a 10-to-1 ratio. Holy smokes, what's up with that? Right? So the statistics bear, this has been going on for several years. The statistics certainly are telling us a story about a non-stationary climate system. And there are many, behind the audience in this nice cartoon, many reminders of a warming world. It's not just splitting hairs over a 10th of a degree temperature. We have a consilience, a confluence of evidence, basically. You can cherry pick one of these off this figure, but the idea is what's the chances of the climate or the planet warming in isolation versus all of these factors. And actually, I noticed this figure doesn't even have melting permafrost on here, which is fascinating. So all I can say is, and I'll let that figure speak for itself. All right, so there are some, wrap it up here with a few more PowerPoint slides. There are some fingerprints to climate change, it turns out. How we know it's us. This is spectacular, it turns out. One of them is the fact that in addition to the CO2 rising in the atmosphere in the upper ocean, we have falling pH. The ocean's becoming more acidic. That is also problematic. We have other fingerprints. This is fantastic. I love this one. This actually, interesting enough, all carbon atoms are not created equal. It turns out some are heavier and some are lighter. Go figure. And so it turns out that plants, which are the precursors to fossilized carbon, actually like the lighter carbon over the heavier carbon. So why do we care? Well, it turns out, basically, as a result of burning fossil fuels, the ratio of the heavier or lighter carbon atoms in the atmosphere have declined over the last 20 or 30 years. And you can see that in this figure. It's a fingerprint. It's us, folks. This is a fingerprint. Furthermore, actually, this is fantastic. You might get excited about this. This is oxygen going down in the atmosphere. It looks like the CO2 trace I showed you earlier with the seasonal oscillation, but it's going the opposite direction. What's up with that? Well, it turns out, actually, this decrease in oxygen Well, it turns out that combustion actually consumes oxygen and produces carbon dioxide, water vapor, or water and heat. So, amazingly so, we know that the CO2 source is from combustion, not melting rock. It's not volcanic. A fingerprint, it's us. We know this unequivocally. The carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has a fingerprint. It's us. It's humans. And finally, my favorite fingerprint, stratospheric cooling. What's up with that? Stratospheric cooling. So this is showing up the observations and the models, but I'm a visual learner, so models are great to look at. So I have two different model simulations, over 100. This is out of the AR4 IPCC, previous IPCC report. The top figure, basically, these are climate simulations. The fun thing you can do with models is you can run them with different forcings. So the top one is just solar over a 100-year period, and you're looking at temperature anomalies, basically, over the globe in that 100-year period, and they range from about a -1 to +1 degree anomalies based on some climate mean in this figure, but there is some take-home. And the bottom one is solar plus carbon dioxide, kind of a neat simulation. Let me tell you a little bit more, since you're not meteorologists in the crowd. North Pole, South Pole, South Pole, North Pole, South Pole. Slow down for a second. And we can split the box in two. Okay? And so up here is the stratosphere, in case you didn't know. Down here is the troposphere. This is a cartoon. Troposphere is about the lowest 15 kilometers of the atmosphere between friends. It's just a rough estimate, basically. Anybody notice something different about these two simulations? And the observations bear this out. Well, if you look at the figures, anybody notice what's happening in the solar plus the greenhouse gas flooding? It looks like the stratosphere actually is not warming but cooling. So one of the fingerprints, basically, of solar, if it was the sun, one of the fingerprints is you get fairly uniform heating in the troposphere and the stratosphere. It turns out that's not what we're seeing. We're actually seeing stratospheric cooling. Again, a greenhouse gas fingerprint. Unmistakable. Okay, these are great. Again, it's showing up not just in models, but in observations. So as I wrap this up, anybody pay any attention to the Arctic this year? Holy smokes, it was crazy. This is an article out of the Scientific American. The Arctic is getting crazy. Over the last 2 decades, Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets have been continuing to lose mass. The glaciers are continuing to shrink, etc., etc. There is about 7 meters of sea level rise locked up in the Greenland ice sheet, and about 70 meters between friends in the Antarctic. Okay, just so you know. And this stuff we know with fairly high confidence that this stuff is the melt's going to continue. This is what 2016 looked like on the globe. Look at the high latitude. This is 2016 temperature anomalies. Look at the high latitude warming. If you're unsure of climate change, relocate. It's spectacular what's going on up at high latitudes. These things are well forecast by climate models. We're looking at temperature anomalies approaching 8 degrees Fahrenheit annually at these high latitudes. It's really something amazing. So how are we doing? Well, unfortunately, not so well. Essentially, we're tracking on the high side of both cumulative CO2 emissions, which is essentially this figure down here. And unfortunately, we're also tracking, if you go back to the third assessment report from the IPCC, we're also tracking on the high level of sea level rise. These are not good signs. And finally, I'll wrap it up with asking you, what's up with the uncertainty? Why the uncertainty? There's about a 1.5 to 4.5 degrees C temperature range in 2100 in terms of projections of temperature changes. Keep in mind, where are we now? We're over 1 degree C above pre-industrial temperature levels. Okay? So this 1.5, 4.5 C. Well, in a nutshell, what's going on? Well, there are things we don't know about eventual population. Thank you, Gordon. Energy consumption and percent of energy type are important. And we don't know what that's going to look like 50 years from now. We probably don't even know what it's going to look like 10 years from now. You can only guess. Feedbacks in the climate system, really important. These include things we've heard about them. Ice albedo, water vapor, clouds, all very important. And why are they important? Because the more additive the feedbacks, the larger the temperature change, and vice versa. Okay, so where we end up, basically, here to here, depends on these kind of things. And finally, I'll bring out, we talk about this in my climate change class, it turns out that the forecast, quote, I'm air quoting, sorry, hasn't changed much since the National Research Council report in 1979. This temperature range has been pretty robust. And I want to leave you with the thought, because there's been a lot of commotion about China now taking over the U.S. and CO2 emissions, but I'd ask you to follow the carbon atoms. So certainly the production is going over in China, but look where the consumption is. It's Europe, basically, and the U.S. So I'll end with this idea, perhaps that's just a shell game. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Our next speaker, Rich Aronson, is going to take us a little further into different aspects of our job.
So it's a lot worse than that.
Mr. Sunshine.
So Steve here he was just soft pedaling it. All right. Let me go here and do that. Okay, so I started this morning with a pretty bad cold, so if I start coughing and shaking, spilling water all over myself, you'll know that it's not a lame attempt at physical comedy. I'm going to try to get through this without losing my voice. So it is worse than that. What I'd like to do is bounce off these two wonderful talks that got me all juiced up and upset and cranked up and all that, and talk to you about some of the further implications of all of this. And I think in large part, we're all preaching to the converted, but I'd like to try to address that a little bit too. So the talk is climate change and the provident earth. I stole that from the title of a book about fisheries called The Provident Sea, and it's this is all about what our earth was and is giving to us and what it may not give us anymore. And I want to start with this picture. This is the Hubbard Glacier in Alaska. My son Max, who was 11 years old at the time, took this picture. It's a beautiful shot. And this is a big-ass glacier. I mean, it's just huge. This is the frontend glacier. Yes, big-ass. You can look that up. And it swings all the way around here. This is in southeastern Alaska. It goes all the way back to the Yukon somewhere. And it flows out, and that is a 12-story high cruise ship. So you can just get an idea. There's just the immensity of this thing. It's just, this ship is nothing. This is it up close. Is the leading edge of the glacier, and it's a little hard to see in this slide, but there's ice sloughing off, and these birds are calving off and splashing. I've put in a few little scales here just to show you the magnitude of what we're talking about. The glacier, the front of the glacier itself is about 400 feet high. This is, of course, a silhouette of the Houses of Parliament and the tower that's got Big Ben, and this is the splash. So it's this stuff is really happening. Don't let these kinds of images cause you to freak out totally. Although a lot of glaciers are retreating, it just happens that this one is advancing. But it's just kind of in a way emblematic of the kinds of things we need to worry about. I've given a lot of talks about climate change, some to groups that were, let me just say, not totally on board. And these are the facts. The climate change is real. You just heard that from Stephen. Air and sea temperatures are rising, sea levels rising, the ocean is turning sour. That's ocean acidification. Human forcing of climate change by greenhouse gas emissions is real, and it's substantial. Again, you got the facts from Stephen. And just as an example, half of Arctic warming, the model estimate of Arctic warming, half of it is from human causes, the other half is from a variety of other natural variations. So, looking at the Arctic, sea ice is melting. The ice is forming later. It's melting earlier, and that's having a lot of consequences, among other things, on albedo, which is the reflection of light energy to which Stephen alluded. That's causing feedback loops that are further warming the Earth, but it's also having an impact on polar bears. And I can't tell if you can see that. Those are two polar bears that are fighting. I took this picture up in Churchill, Manitoba. I immediately got the title for this slide. This slide I call Faculty Meeting at the Florida Institute of Technology. and polar bears, they're in some trouble. And they're in trouble because they depend on sea ice. And the reason they depend on sea ice is that they're active in the winter. They feed in the winter. What they do is they go out on the sea ice, they pull these hapless seals out of the water, they strip their blubber off, and that's what they eat. They eat seal blubber. They get their energy from that, and they metabolize the fat and get their fresh water from that. That is what they eat. During the summer, when there's no sea ice, they're stuck on land, and they're fasting. Okay? So those are the basic facts about polar bears. In the 1980s, polar bears were stuck on land fasting for 120 days a year, and they were able to cope with that. It turns out that for every year since then, on average, these polar bears have lost 1 day of feeding. So what does that mean? That means that in the 2010s, they've lost a month. They're starving for a month longer than they used to be. And these are the estimates of mortality of these polar bears going up as the amount of fasting goes up. You eat less, you're more likely to die. I mean, seems pretty commonsensical. So just calculating this at present rates, by the 2020s we can expect 20% mortality, and by the 2030s we can expect even higher mortality. It is for this reason that polar bears are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. And that I could give a 3-hour talk about that. I promise you I'm not going to do that. There are a lot of very interesting legal and policy issues connected with that. Okay, so those are polar bears. Another example, these are just some iconic examples of what's going on. Trees in the forest on the Andes, as it gets warmer, every species that's out there, every plant species, every animal species marches to the tune of its own physical and biological preferences. What does it like to eat? What temperatures does it like? So on and so forth. They find themselves in the same place at the same time, just by happenstance, because they have shared preferences, and they may interact, and those interactions may be strong. So that's what a biological community is. It's kind of like whatever judge it was who had a pornography case, and he said, well, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. And that's what we say about biological communities. They're very hard to define. It's just this kind of collection of things that do stuff. Anyway, these communities, such as they are of these plants, they're moving upslope as it gets warmer. They live in cool weather. It gets a little warmer. They go up to a higher elevation, and it's a little cooler, and then so on and so forth. And as it gets progressively warmer, they're progressively moving up. That's great, except the thing about mountains is they're pointy, and as they move, as these plant species move up, they got a problem, and that is a common principle of ecology species area relationship, which is that the smaller the area, the fewer species it can support, and at some point they're going to wind up at the tippy pointy little top, and there ain't going to be any room for them. So that's just another upsetting and nasty implication. Penguins. Everybody loves penguins. If you don't like penguins, please raise your hand. I was waiting for Spencer back there to raise his hand. But so we all love penguins. Penguins are changing along the western Antarctic Peninsula. These are everybody's favorite penguins. These are the Adelie penguins, the ones with the bow tie and the tuxedo, right? And then there are a whole variety of other species, like these chinstraps. These are penguins depend on sea ice for food. Algae grow under the sea ice. That algae falls off in little bits. Krill eat those little bits. The penguins eat the krill, and there's your food chain. And there's a whole bunch of other complications. But what's happening is that as sea ice is declining along the peninsula, these Adelie penguins are forced to move ever further south. They're being replaced by warmer weather penguins that are less dependent on sea ice and are actually recent migrants coming in, expanders coming in from the sub-Antarctic. So here's just a kind of a general kind of trajectory of these penguins. There's several species of them. They're all roughly the same size. They all eat roughly the same thing, but not exactly. And it's these Adelie penguins, the little tuxedo ones, that are taking the biggest hit. And then here are a couple of populations of chinstraps, one that's going down and one that's kind of going down and bouncing up. And you can see this as you look at penguins up and down the western side of the Antarctic Peninsula. There are chinstraps, they're increasing, and the Adelies are declining. So it's just another upsetting case study. And then coral reefs. I have to thank Rob Van Woosick for these photos. This is a lovely coral reef out in the Central Pacific, and these corals make their living, or they get their energy from little algae that live inside their bodies. So basically, they're like little colonies of sea anemones. They wave them around, wave around their tentacles. They capture little microcrustaceans and worms and things out in the water at night. So that's how they get their proteins. And then they get their potatoes from these algae that live inside them. When it gets super hot, they get sick. What happens when you get sick? You throw up. And what they do is they puke out these algae. The symbiosis, the tight relationship between these algae and the coral animals breaks down, and they get rid of these algae at least temporarily, and they get sick. The color of the corals comes from those algae, so they turn blanched. It's called coral bleaching. And if it doesn't stay too hot too long in a hot year, coral bleaching goes away. They manage to recover. But if it's too hot for too long, then that's it. They die. And that's, of course, been happening more and more recently. So, most recently, in 2016, a large swath of the Great Barrier Reef got whacked by coral bleaching. This just came out of the paper in Nature recently, but it's been in the news rather a lot. There was a big El Nino. And what this figure is showing is different bleaching events in different years. There was a huge one in 1998. There was one in 2002. There was this big one in 2016. Different portions of the Great Barrier Reef got more or less heated during these different events. And the interesting thing is that, well, interesting, not a big shocker, it was the areas that were the most heated that experienced the most bleaching. So this is thermal stress, and then these are the bleaching with the higher color temperatures, indicating more severe bleaching. So, well, we thought, okay, well, that really sucks. Well, it sucks even worse. There's just a picture of some of these bleached corals. Looks pretty grim, but it sucks even worse because now it looks like we're having back-to-back El Ninos. And so before, it was the northern Great Barrier Reef that was bleaching. It's all these red dots, and now it seems to be the central part of the Great Barrier Reef that's getting clobbered as well. So what this is saying is that these climatic effects, they're real. You can tag them directly to temperature. The other thing that they're saying is that you can set aside a marine protected area anywhere you like. You can think you're going to protect these things, and it's not going to protect them against these overarching global sorts of impacts. It'll protect your fish. It's not going to save the corals if something like this is going on. So, well, if that wasn't depressing enough, and if Steve's talk wasn't depressing enough, if Gordon's talk didn't get you juiced up enough, why the hell else should we care? Well, I want to just try to bring this in to what this means to us personally. If you don't give a rat's ass about the rest of the world, surely you care about yourself and you care about humanity. So we're looking at more heat waves, stronger hurricanes, more wildfires, more winter cold snaps, rising sea level. We just heard about rising sea level, as well as compromised food security with the polarward migration of farm belts and changes in fish stocks, and compromised water security. Water is the new oil. The wars are going to be more and more about water and less about oil, because it's not going to be that much oil left. And an increased incidence of human, livestock, and wildlife diseases, which is something that Gordon has already broached. As far as the hurricanes go, I heard from a colleague who went to a military think tank, and what he learned was that if there's a Category 5 direct hit on Miami, there is not enough insurance in the world to fix it. So we're in some deep. Okay, so just some of the data here. Yeah, that's another scientific term, right? So climate change and wheat production. In a lot of places, climate change, as the temperature goes up and as the hydrographic regimes change, wheat production is going to go down. There are a few places in which it's going to go up, but the overall global wheat production is going to go down. You probably know that the human population is going up. That's not going to be so hot. Okay, climate change and water. Here's some empirical observations. Water stress has been increasing through time. That's not so good. And then here are some projections. These are just, you can find these, just do Google image. These water stress is projected to be quite a bit more severe in 2025 than in 1995. So both empirically and on theoretical grounds, we can expect some issues with water. This is a little bright. This is one of the many maps of malaria. The red are the possible extensions of incidence of malaria by the year 2050, and that includes Florida, of course. That is North America. There, I guess I got it right. So we know dengue has arrived, and all that. When I was a kid, I took biology in junior high, and they told me, what shocked me was that filariasis and malaria were still there in Charleston, and and then all of a sudden through brilliant mosquito control they were gone, and now we could be seeing them all over again. And Gordon is nodding, so I didn't screw that part up. Okay, and then violence. A lot of people have been looking at violence and temperature, and I think we all know that when it's a hot summer, people get crazy, and they do, and it's real. And a large group of scientists and sociologists got together, and they looked at violence from all sorts of different perspectives. They looked at global conflict, they looked at local violence, and they looked at crime, they looked at soccer hooliganism, they looked at all this stuff, and it always went up with increasing temperature and increasing drought. In other words, water stress and high temperature makes people crazy, and they start fighting. They fight on a local level, and they fight on a medium level, and they fight on a global level. So this transcends scale. So it's another interesting thing that little things actually add up to make big things. And so I mean, these are important both obviously in terms of what of what we need to think about, what we need to do, but it's also interesting scientifically that you don't have to think, oh my God, it's going to be different globally than locally. In a lot of cases, what you see on a small scale enables you to predict what you're going to see on a global scale. So, a 12-step program to Armageddon. Okay, this is just common sense, and it starts with overpopulation. Nobody, for whatever reason, you go to a million climate talks, nobody talks about overpopulation. Thank heavens, my two colleagues have already talked about it. I'm not scared to talk about it. Everybody knows there's too many people on the planet. Overpopulation, well, climate change, pollution, and overharvesting, it's all numbered, because it kind of have to come to 12, so I can say 12-step program, right? And that leads to environmental degradation. That leads to increased poverty and economic disparity. And economic disparity, in and of itself, is going to be a root cause of societal meltdown. So the environment degrades, resources are down, and people who live in rural areas or live in fishing communities or whatever, what are they going to do? They're going to move to urban centers, they're going to become part of the urban underclass, and what does that result? Radicalization and social unrest. And why do we care as Americans? Because we take terrorism so personally. It's going to be about terrorism, the reaction, compromised civil. Does any of this sound familiar? Compromised civil liberties as a reaction, escalated responses on all sides, global conflagration, and so societal meltdown. I mean, this is not crazy ass rich just making up stuff. This is, you should be recognizing that we've already gone through some of these steps. So there's that. Okay. So what are we going to do? Well, first of all, climate change and democracy. The basis of our society is democracy. Democracy was designed by Thomas Jefferson in this country, with a little bit of input from John Adams and a few other smart people. And the core is, it's founded on the idea of an educated and informed electorate. And the point of all this, to say this, is that everybody says, well, I don't believe in climate change, blah, blah, blah. That's just a bunch of crap. We're not here to vote on the facts. We're here to look at the facts and figure out what we should do in response, right? The facts, the science is not democratic. It was never meant to be democratic. And there are lots of reasons why people like to vote on the facts in this country, having to do with the frontier, and there's just a lot of sociology that goes into it. But the fact of the matter is that the facts are there. And what we need to do as a society is think and debate and vote on what we should do about it. That's a really important message. Okay. Another thing. Prior occurrence is irrelevant. I often get people say, well, it's happened before, so BFD, that's another scientific name, right? Right? You all know what that means. If you don't Google it, you'll have a nice ha-ha, right? So everybody says, well, it's happened before, prior occurrence, so that's just irrelevant. The important issue is this a desirable thing or not? And of course, it's wildly undesirable. I'll tell you another thing that's happened before. 65 million years ago, a big-ass asteroid slammed into the Earth and blew apart the dinosaurs and shook the place up and made a big mess. I wouldn't want that to happen again either, right? So climate change, yeah, it's happened before, but before there weren't X numbers of millions of people in Bangladesh or Venice or London or the Bronx or wherever waiting to get flooded out. So that is an enormous difference. desirability aside, as Stephen pointed out, it hasn't happened before like this. Climate change hasn't been this fast or this extreme in at least 1 million years. So, so even the basic argument that has happened before is not, strictly speaking, correct. Strictly speaking. And finally, climate change, because it's non-linear, it's not additive, it's all about thresholds and surprises. It's full of surprises. They're all nasty surprises. Or almost all of them are nasty, terrible surprises. So, what are we going to do? Well, I wouldn't be standing up here if I thought this was a hopeless situation, as I've often said, being from New York. If I felt like it was all over, I would have jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge long ago. But there is a model for international cooperation on the environment, and that's the Montreal Protocol banning the use of CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. That was the aerosol stuff, as a response to the ozone hole over Antarctica. It's another huge environmental problem. To this day, so that's basically the stratospheric ozone is thinned out, there's more ultraviolet coming in, it's having impacts. If you go to Punta Arenas in southern Chile, the kids are only allowed out a couple of hours a day because of the ultraviolet from the ozone hole. So this is real, it's got real consequences, and once CFCs were banned, the ozone hole opened up, it closed, it opened, sometimes opened wide, sometimes it closed, sometimes opened a little, blah, blah. It's all noisy, it's all messy, but the overall trend is that gradually this is actually working. And doing this about climate can work as well. It's not the same problem. It's much more thorny and much more difficult, but it is doable. Okay, who's on board about climate change? I'm not voting. Say, raise your hands. Thank you. All right. Well, while politicians are grandstanding about climate change, the media are giving equal time to opposing viewpoints. The military is on board, even in this administration, which, as you know, has got its own stylings, responsive stylings to the issue of climate change. The Secretary of Defense is talking about climate change. If the Arctic is open, who's got a free range to come straight at us? Well, you know who our buddies, the Russians. So they're starting to get interested in this. They're interested in issues about water. They're interested in issues about global conflict, because global conflict is going to go up as water becomes scarce and the temperature goes up. So they're on board. They're thinking. I already told you about the think tank about civil defense and a Force 5 hit on Miami. Global insurance companies are on board. They're sitting around in Bermuda. Lloyd's of London is figuring out, what are we going to charge for insurance in an era of climate change? So while everybody else is screaming, yes, climate change, no climate change, all these are saying, well, just doing the calculations. Well, we got to make some money, we got to survive. And the Pope is on board, among many other religious leaders. So if you have not seen the Pope's encyclical on climate change, just find it online. It's wonderful. Okay, so there are many other religious leaders, and there are many religious leaders that would surprise you. There are many religious leaders, of groups that you would think would be very kind of fundamentalist and very arch in the opposite direction, and they are all about being stewards of the creation, and they are on board and they're totally green. So it's really interesting. Okay, what are you supposed to do? Well, first of all, apart from your individual actions, I'll get to that in a second, you got to work with all the different stakeholders. Do yourself a favor, don't call them a bunch of idiots, and especially don't precede idiots with some sort of an adjective. This is kind of my first inclination here. I've been in this business for a long time, and what I discovered is that if you call people stupid idiots for whatever reason, they don't like it and they get insulted. It just upsets them and they don't want to talk to you. Well, you want to talk to people, right? You can't not talk to people, okay? Show some respect and show sympathy for their political and economic restraints. You cannot just say, okay, you so-and-sos, this is what you need to do, because they ain't going to do it. You've got to convince them, and you have to make it worth everybody's while to do this. And one of the other things that I think we're all coming to realize is that telling people you're going to die in a few decades, it just, how many times can you listen to the fact that we're all going to burn up into a city? It results in somebody once said, called in a speech, paralytic nihilism. It's like, I can't deal with this. So much better is to say, hey, guess what? You can make some money off of this. People respond to that stuff. And there is money to be made by going green, because the people who get in there first, they're going to make a freaking fortune, right? So that's another thing. Okay, your choice, right? You want to teach everybody a lesson, or you want to save the planet, right? The essence of politics is not teaching people a lesson. The essence of politics is getting done what you got to get done, right? So forget about saying, I told you so, or whatever. Don't do that. Just go out and save the planet. So your individual actions, okay, well, of course, the thermostat, the LEDs, and all that stuff, drive a Prius, but you need to become an activist for carbon. I'm not trying to belittle any of those things. All those individual actions add up, and that's, I think, it's like voting. If everybody votes, everybody votes. If everybody doesn't vote, then you think your vote doesn't matter, you don't vote. Well, it does matter. Okay? Become an activist for carbon control, live sustainably, individual actions add, right? I mean, you can take your menu of actions you want to take, and you gotta vote, and voting is important. And I say this to you as adults, I say this when I go to a 5th grade class at Gemini Elementary. Finally, trend is not destiny. Thanks very much.
Ken Wigram is going to talk for a few moments about an event that gives you a chance to do exactly what Rich was talking about, and that is getting out and doing and making a difference. Thank you, Ken.
I've been living in the seams between the science and the politics since the late 1980s, and I was scary before, and excuse me if I'm scarier now. But when you get off college campuses and you try to do this for a living, professionally or as an advocate in your limited personal time, you're dealing with a lot of challenges. This slide captures it pretty well. Before social media came around, there were a lot of other challenges. What we've seen is that the advent of social media has polarized folks a lot more than we expected. We thought social media was going to bring us together. So my charge is to very briefly take you through some of the resources that are available to you to communicate with people effectively about climate change. And that is not easy in this atmosphere. I'm going to take you through 3 web resources, which I've found in decades, over decades, really can help. The first one is NASA Climate. The URL is climate.nasa.gov. If you're not familiar with this and you're interested in this issue, I urge you to look at it soon. This is the home page as of today. The website, I'm happy to say, hasn't been measurably changed in the last few months. One of the great things about this website is it's got all these real-time data points on the bottom. Boom, carbon dioxide numbers. Yeah, we're higher than we've been in a million years, and we cracked that 400 part per million line just a few years ago. And we're zooming. There's no precedent for this. Arctic ice minimum, boom. Land ice, boom. Sea level. Look for that to accelerate before mid-century. It's already accelerating via a lot of measurements. If you go to the home page here and you go to the Facts tab, you get a drop down and look right there. Boom. There's a thing called scientific consensus, and I'm glad to say as of a few hours ago, this has not been taken down. You go, I'm not smiling about it, all right, but I appreciate that. Okay, this is taken from that link. On the NASA Climate website, they have done us all a favor and assembled position statements on climate change by all of the leading U.S. scientific societies. Now, some of you who've been doing this a while, you might have gotten into the quicksand of debating with people about 97% of scientists agree on climate change, and someone will say, no, it's 67%. That is just a red herring at this stage. What we need, I would suggest, to do is focus on what the American Association for the Advancement of Science and the American Chemical Society and the American Geophysical Union and the American Medical Association, and I can keep going, the blue ribbon organizations on the planet, the best of what we have intellectually, populated on their boards not by climate advocates, but by lab-dwelling people who typically shy away from controversy, have generated in position statements for decades. When I use this, I get some of the most rabid people to back off. And to help folks out, I brought about 80 to 100 of these. This is a one-pager. What you're looking at here is on the front, and the American Physical Society, the American Meteorological Society, their statements are on the back with the links. You can find this handout on the table behind that first pillar or the table in the middle of the library. Okay? I encourage you to take one, make photocopies. You can go to this website and get more. Here's the website. When you use this with people, it really tends to create space for a continued discussion. Next. Some of you may be familiar with this website, skepticalscience.com. Okay, I hope the font is large enough. You hear about science, skeptics of climate science. Well, the whole modus operandi with this site is that we're going to be skeptical about skeptics of climate science, and we're going to use the same rigorous thought procedures to look at the data. And so this is a really remarkable site that is endless in terms of the detail, and they provide explanations on anything you can think of, volcanoes, et cetera, solar, with a beginning explanation or an intermediate explanation. On the home page, and this is from today, they have a most used climate myths link. Check this out. Okay? This is very valuable. You can go to this, you can click any one of these myths, and there are many others, and you will have elevator speech discussion points when someone is telling you that it's any number of things except what the data shows it is. Okay? So I told you I was going to give you 3 websites. This is the second, skepticalscience.com. Third, FIT for 7 years, using a lot of students, has maintained what has become the largest library of adaptation, coastal adaptation literature that I'm aware of on the planet. It's the FIT Virtual Climate Adaptation Library with a variety of partners. There are now over 2,600 articles posted on this website. Margaret, raise your hand. Margaret, one of my students back there in the sustainability major, has done a hell of a lot of work on this. Thank you, Margaret. Really helped us in Europe. There are 15 major categories globally. We have every coastal area on the planet in this library in approximately 90 subfolders. We're always looking for more contributions. The best way to find it is to simply search the phrase sea level rise library in your Google search bar, and it's the first thing that comes up. I'm going to talk really briefly, and unfortunately this can't be comprehensive, about some of the local nonprofit organizations with interest in climate issues. Basically, there are a variety of organizations in the Space Coast that have an interest in it. Some are working on climate change issues more than others. Very prominent is the Citizens Climate Lobby. They have a table on both sides of the library. On your way out, I would encourage you to stop and talk with those good folks. They are nonpartisan. They are working very hard to advance the bipartisan climate caucus in the House and the Senate of the United States. They have made a lot of progress there with a variety of other nonprofits. The Citizens Climate Lobby, they work with the folks at the League of Women Voters. We also have the Marine Resources Council. A lot of folks are familiar with their work on the IRL for decades. I'm on that board. We've created a climate change subcommittee, and we're looking at IRL and climate change issues as time allows, with many, many other challenges. There are many other organizations. You can see them here. I won't go through them all. This is not comprehensive. Get out there and get involved with one of these organizations. It can really matter. The people working in these organizations are typically quite remarkable. You can also do things in your city. You can get involved with your local city or your county. For example, think about getting on your city land use board or your city sustainability board. If you don't have one, maybe you and some friends can create one. We've done that in Satellite Beach. The city of Satellite Beach, we created on the land use board, which I joined in 2009, we created a sea level rise subcommittee. And we went through a lot of rocky roads on that. This is my son, the day of a climate change workshop in the city last year. There's been a lot of progress in that city, and there's a lot of folks who would like to see that kind of progress elsewhere in the county. It's not only about that city, there's a variety of cities that are getting there. Finally, there is a National March for Science in Washington tomorrow. It includes many of those scientific organizations I mentioned previously. The Space Coast is one of over 400 sites around the country with satellite marches. Okay? The March for Our Region is in Titusville tomorrow. It starts at the American Space Museum in Titusville, which will have free entry from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Usually it's a $10 per head entry, so that's a pretty good deal. At 1 p.m. there will be a half-mile march from the museum to Spaceview Park on the Indian River Lagoon. A rally will then be held with speakers, exhibits, and vendors. I encourage anyone who has a little time tomorrow to get up to that. Titusville is not that far. I'll be speaking. There's a variety of, there's going to be something like 25 speakers, about 20 exhibitors and vendors. It's on the river. It's going to be a beautiful day. If you have any questions, you can probably get some more information at this website, or you can email me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. We're going to move some chairs around for the panel. We all have gotten, I think, from these four marvelous speakers, a sense of the deepest, darkest Darwinian secret, whether it's gorillas or polar bears, kangaroos or cows, or even mosquitoes and human beings. We're all in this together. And that means that we're all ecologists. We're all living in a habitat, and what we do matters in terms of going to our local governments, going to our churches, our synagogues, our mosques, going to meetings like it's going to take place in Titusville. Making a difference is something that starts each day, in the same way that I get dressed, one leg at a time. Take a step forward together with another person, and you've made a difference. So let's get some chairs together. We've got a panel that's going to be taking and fielding questions for you, and Mark's going to be our moderator for that.
Well, if I may ask our panelists to please come forward. And I would like to ask them to, in fact, take a moment to introduce themselves rather than me doing a poor job of that. Perhaps they could actually speak to their expertise and the relevance to this get-together that we have today. So Heidi, should I start with you?
Sure. Hi, I'm Heidi Hatfield-Edwards. I'm the chair of the communication programs here at Florida Tech, and I'm here to talk a little bit about the communication aspect of the climate and environmental communication, and I will pass it on to Mike.
Oh, sure. Thanks. Good evening, everybody, and thank everybody for being here. It's been a great talk so far. My name is Mike Slotkin. I'm an economist in the College of Business. I'm actually an international trade economist by training, but there's only two of us at Florida Tech, so very early on, I decided to sort of branch a little bit into environmental economics, and I've been teaching an environmental econ class here since I think 1998.
Hi everybody, my name is Zach Eichholz. I'm a student here at Florida Tech. I'm actually a grad student. I'm a interdisciplinary sciences major under Dr. Lindeman, and I'm here to talk about kind of more the student side of what Florida Tech does in terms of sustainability action. I'm really honored to be here. I just found my name on the list amongst all these doctors and professors one day. So, okay. So I'll pass on to Dr. Lazar.
I have to follow. Well, you guys know me already a little bit, so I'm an atmospheric scientist actually here at FIT, and I know a little bit about climate change. I teach a course in it, graduate students, and I teach some other courses here as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Rich Aronson. I'm the head of biology here. I am a marine ecologist turned paleontologist and geologist. And I didn't sign up for this climate change thing, but here we are. We're in an emergency, and we've got to deal with it. I wanted to be a naturalist. I used to watch Wild Kingdom on TV for those and want to run around the Serengeti punching out wildebeest. But instead, here I am trying to deal with climate change and working in the Antarctic and on coral reefs both. And the thing that ties them together actually is that if you look at the seasonal or the annual range of temperatures, it's very low both on coral reefs and in the Antarctic as compared to the temperate zone from New York. And in the summer it's really hot, and in the winter it's really cold. So these are places with a narrow temperature range, and they are feeling the impacts of climate change earliest and most dramatically. I'm going to turn this over to Mark, who's about to look at away from me.
Sometimes you have to take the microphone away from Rich. So the way we are going to do this, I think it's pretty obvious, but if you have a question or if you'd like to make a comment, by all means, feel free to. We do have a microphone here so everyone can hear. Please come forward and ask your question or make your comment, and we will then see who in the panel wish to answer, or perhaps more than anyone there. So I do see, please come forward. I appreciate if you say whether you are somehow related to Florida Tech or you are a member of the community so that we know who you are a little bit.
Or a student.
Or a student perhaps.
Okay, I'm Bill Revez. I'm also a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby. I'm an oceanographer. I have a master's degree in oceanography. I have a master's degree in physical oceanography, I should say. Bachelor of Science. Been in the Navy submarine force for 20 years, retired in 1982. Went to work for McDonnell Douglas Boeing and helped get the space station going. If by some miracle, a year from now, we can get our carbon level down to 400, what would be the end effect still 20 years from now?
I'd be happy to answer that. I have a pretty big mouth. I probably
Just to make sure everyone.
In a nutshell, there's something called equilibrium climate sensitivity, and there's also this transient climate sensitivity. One takes equilibrium is a lot longer. So say hypothetically we were to level out at the current levels, we're already committed to, even if we level out, we're committed, remember the system has a thermal inertia to it. And so even if we level out, I would say we're at about 1 now, we're probably committed to close to 2 degrees C. We're getting very close to that at this point. And so the warming of the system would catch up with CO2 loading. So we're looking at about at least another half degree, maybe all the way up to 2 degrees C, possible, depending on the feedback.
I think that's something people don't understand. We can stop now.
That is correct. So that's why it's really important to curb emissions.
Hey.
Richard Baker with Pelican Island Audubon Society. And I was a little late getting in here, so I missed the first couple of talks. But birds actually are pretty good evidence that we have global warming too. We're going to lose 314 species in the Americas, which is about 50% of them are going to be going down or even going into extinction in the next 50 years. But is it only the U.S. that has all these deniers, or how is the rest of the world working on this? I'd like to know where we are in the U.S. compared to the other nations that we have in the world.
I'll just make a quick comment. Yeah, I'd recommend a book by Sean Otto called Fool Me Twice. And it goes into the peculiar American distrust for science in general. And very briefly, and I hope I'm not hashing this too badly, science was the be-all and end-all after the Second World War because we were in the midst of the Cold War, and then all of a sudden, as the military-industrial complex was caused environmental issues and health issues, that we discovered both the left and the right turned on science. And so I think that's a large part of the distrust. There's the pollution thing, and then also the climate thing, and those are bundled together pretty well. So that's part of it. I think this is also culturally a little bit wrapped up with the whole frontier mentality and kind of an overriding sadness about the loss of the frontier. I think that there's just there's a pretty serious strain in America that nobody's going to tell me what I should think and how to act. So that I think is this is again I really recommend this book. I think that's the origin of this idea of trying to vote on the facts. Don't tell me what to think, you pointy-headed so-and-sos, and I'm going to make up my own mind. And that again, as I was trying to argue in my talk, that's not what democracy is meant to be about. Democracy is meant to be about the policies that we formulate to respond to the evidence. So it's a great question, and I really it's a wonderful book.
I just briefly add into it. About 10 years ago, there were a few faculty here, myself, Karen Chambliss. I thought I saw Tom Marcinkowski in the room. Ken participated as well. State Department grant in Hungary, and it was obvious when we were over there that even a country that has much less in terms of environmental policy, the integration of sustainability into all aspects of their curriculum was much more prevalent than it is here. And that was 10 years ago. So, sort of a court.
I think, I'm trying to sound smart here. I think too, seeing is believing in the world for a lot of people. And I think a lot of other countries are seeing problems faster than us, especially ones that aren't as developed yet, and even ones that are developed, such as in Beijing, China, where they can't even see their hand in front of their faces because of all the pollution. And that drives action faster because they don't want their kids suffering, they don't want themselves suffering. Here, on a day-to-day basis, even though we know it's happening, it's the average person can probably look up and say, oh, it was cold this year. It was cold last year, probably cold next year. It's just, I think it's a seeing is believing thing too for a lot of people.
I read an essay last week by Edmund Wilson, which makes a very striking argument that we Americans oscillate between the notion of our exceptionalism, that America is somehow exempt from the boundaries that other nations have faced. We've never had a neighbor contiguous to us like France and Germany that across the Rhine was an adversary. That sense of exceptionalism has, I think, given us license through much of our history to say that we can be profligate in our behavior towards one another and towards the environment, because there'll be always more pie, and the bigger piece can be there. There is another aspect of America, though, that has been, and the reason we had as our title, The Road Not Taken, there has been a fundamental environmentalism in America, which is a noble tradition that goes back to people like Thoreau and Demure and to Rachel Carson. And in some sense, this is a wrestling with our national character. Are we going to imagine that we're different than the rest of the planet and that the rules that apply to our species don't apply to Americans? Or are we going to accept the fact that, as I said, Darwin has revealed to us, we're all in this together? The other aspect of this, and another date, I'm a historian, I'm always asked, are these dates going to be on the midterm? And it's the final that counts. And the final is what's going to happen. In 2008, for the first time in human history, more than 50% of us lived in urban areas. And that's a marker. Cities like Shanghai with 23 million, Beijing with 19 million. We're going to see a trend of concentrations of people, which will mean that in the wintertime in Beijing, that children at risk go outside to play. I believe that in many parts of the world, that awareness is more sharply felt today. It will be sharply felt by us too, in that world, as Rich has said, will become a lot of eyes looking our direction, wondering about you exceptional Americans that consume more products, that have more of that heavy carbon, and bear a greater responsibility than perhaps any other part of the human family. So it's a challenge. Exceptionalism or environmentalism, you choose.
You gotta get to the
My name is George Rosenfield. Some of you here know me. I'm going to say something, or you'll lynch me when I leave if I don't say something. I am an environmental scientist and also a photo measuring scientist, photogrammetrist. I have a bachelor's in forestry from University of Massachusetts, which was all environmental, and I have a master's from New York State College of Environmental Science and Forestry, where I specialized in photo mapping, geodesy, cartography, and photogrammetry, and as forest engineering, to merge my Army engineering career with my forestry career. And I was worked with Diane Burrell in the Marine Resources Council from 1986 when I returned to Brevard County for about 12 years till she retired. I was her assistant environmental scientist. With the U.S. Geological Survey, well, I was here in the 50s and 60s. I was the photogrammetrist for the missile range, worked on everything launched during that period of time. And then I went with after the big layoff and recession in 1965, I went with the U.S. Geological Survey with a 3-year interlude first with a small company owned by Raytheon Autometric, working on satellite imagery. But with the Geological Survey, towards the last end, I was a specialist in using satellite data for natural resource studies on my background. I published the U.S. Geological Survey report, internal report. It's been published. Naturally, I forgot to bring it with me. At the age of 91, I forget a lot of things. And I put my papers together yesterday, and I've been involved with the environment here so much. I kind of thought this was going to be environmental, and I don't know why. I knew it was global warming. I thought about bringing it, and I forgot. Anyway, it was a study on sea level rising and falling during the Cenozoic era of the 65 million years, from the Cretaceous, which is the end of the dinosaurs, through the present. And there is, I had 2 sets of data that were given to me by a geologist looking for oil. And one was the depth, the thickness of paleozoological data, the little foraminiferous microcelled animals that proliferate in shallow water and do not proliferate in deep water. And I went to another geologist that I had taken statistical courses with, a young woman, and she gave me a set of paleobotanical data, borings, which had just been released by the Exxon company, and this was back about 1981. Anyway, I used the 2 sets of data in a statistical analysis, both independently and together, and they both had the same 9.6 million year cycle in sea level rising and falling, and the paleobotanical data lagged the paleozoological data by 2.7 million years. And it's not dated to any time because the geologists themselves, for dating that kind of data, have a 2 million year error in the dating of it. So where we stand right now in that 9.6 million year cycle is just unknown. But I know, for one thing, with the Florida Trail Association, I've enjoyed hiking and camping out in the Bull Creek area, 70 miles west of the shoreline on seaside sand dunes. So,
Would you like to?
so I was very interested in what you say because my information goes back a long way, and all the modern information. And as a statistician, you got to watch where your data comes from. But actually, the physical data of what's happening to the glaciers is very important, I think. But
Why don't we hear from our panel to your comments? Anyone wants to say something to that?
I'm not sure there was a question.
I don't have a question. I don't have a question. It's just that measurement, photo
Why don't we, in the interest of time, and I do see quite a few hands, so let's maybe we can talk that offline. Please go ahead. And then gentleman over here.
I'm John Santoff. I'm also with the Citizens Climate Lobby. We have been listening to a number of conservative economists who say that one reason that fossil fuels were being burned at the rate that they are is that they're underpriced. They don't reflect the full cost to society of the carbon that's put into the environment. And at the same time, they receive substantial subsidies from the government. So they're recommending that the externalities, which is what the economists label these costs that aren't reflected in the price, they're recommending that the externalities be factored into the price of fossil fuels. Which leads to the question, do you think that we can reverse the trend on carbon emissions without putting a carbon price into place?
I guess. So if I was going to do a presentation, it was a John, right? Your name is John?
Yeah, it's John.
If I was going to do a presentation, I would have started off talking about externalities, talking about cigarette smoking first, college education as a positive externality leading into this. So, yeah, I mean, the idea is that you need a carbon price on this, whether you do it through a carbon tax or carbon permit and cap and trade. You know, I know Nordhaus is talking about a $25 carbon tax, you know, price per carbon per ton. And the idea is if you do that, I think your word is stabilization at some point. Okay, but that has to be factored in, and what that effectively does is it raises the price. Think of your electric bill. Think of your electric bill going up by about 20%. Think of your fuel bill going up by 10%. It changes behavior, and it promotes the usage of renewables because those things are now price competitive versus fossil fuel. So the answer, I thought maybe your question was, do we think, or does anyone up here think that this can be solved without pricing carbon? I don't. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, from a policy perspective, all the education and knowledge and communication should be driving to a point where you can convince enough people to price carbon.
That's what we're working on. Thank you.
Would you like to do it?
My name is Jesse Hewitt. I was a graduate student here quite a number of years ago. But also Dr. Patterson, I remember the NAACP. And it's interesting, the NAACP, a civil rights group, has become interested in this area. And under the, I think it's called environmental justice. Because what's going to be the impact of this on all the people? And my question is more like a technical one. What is the weakest point in the evidence? I saw some of this data was oscillatory. Like sometimes there's periods of warming, like there's some periods of cooling. What is the greatest weakness in the evidence why we would have so much trouble convincing people? And I know it has a tendency to spill over political lines too, which way are we going with this? So I'd like to know what's the problem with the evidence?
I'm going to flip that on you, if that's okay. There's nothing wrong with the evidence. The problem, of course, I have a colleague of mine who's a historian, basically, a Yale historian, named Naomi Oreskes in Harvard. Awesome. And she talks about this. She's written a couple of books on this obfuscation of the truth by big tobacco. And so the fossil fuel industry, if you want to follow not just the carbon atoms, but the money, there's huge amounts of dollars flowing into basically from that industry to hide the reality of the evidence that sits out there. I mean, think about the carcinogenic nature of tobacco and how long it took basically for folks to, and this is Naomi's sort of hypothesis or premise that she talks about. She's got a movie on it as well. Anyway, it's a documentary, but besides the fact, I mean, these are the issues you're up against, right? You're up against a lot of money and a lot of folks that are engaging basically in misinformation. And folks here, I really don't need to elaborate any more than that. So,
Yeah, and I think your question in part was political, but also in part was scientific, which is what actually, you want to know what actually are the weak points of the science. Yeah, so the science gets, every time the IPCC meets, the science gets tighter and tighter. We're getting better and better at it. One of the weak points was sea level rise, because an earlier IPCC report did not take into account Greenland melting. The reason they didn't do that was because they didn't know what number to put on it. So all that was to say that it's a heck of a lot worse than the original estimate. So that's one hole. But we know that the case that was made was actually conservative. So basically, the sea level rise is going to be a lot higher than those earlier estimates, and those estimates are getting better. So that's one example of how these numbers are getting tighter and tighter. Science is about uncertainty and narrowing the window of uncertainty, and that's what we're doing. One of I'll just give you two things about climate change. One of the earliest predictions about climate change was that the jet stream would wobble, and so it does. So that was a prediction that was corroborated really early. One of the remaining areas of debate and genuine scientific uncertainty is what is going to happen with hurricanes. And there's some thought that, well, hurricanes will be amped up because there's a lot going to be, the ocean's going to be hotter, so that'll fuel hurricanes. And then there's also a possibility of upper atmospheric wind shear, which I'm sure Steve can address better than I, which would tend to lop off these hurricanes. So that's all the things that that we think about. There's so many different things. You have like a punch list of potential impacts of climate change. This is one of the areas, I think, where we're still trying to figure out what's what. But by and large, there's can be very little doubt that a lot of these things are going roughly, if not accurately, in the direction that we think they are.
So a few weeks ago, Mike and Ken and I were on a panel that was sponsored by the Brevard Cultural Alliance, and we talked about a lot of these issues. And that question, actually, I think, I'm going to turn it a little bit also and talk about, it's not necessarily about the science itself, it's about the audiences, and the question that was posed to me during that other panel was, why, despite a massive volume of information broadcast in so many ways, are many of us still deaf to those messages? And that becomes sort of that bigger question, and there are a lot of reasons, and we look at the audiences. I posed at least 3 possible reasons why we're deaf to those messages. One is that we are in filter bubbles. We surround ourselves with messages that resonate with our own biases. And so when we can get out of those filter bubbles and we can get others out of their filter bubbles, we talked a little bit about preaching to the choir, right? You all are here because you're interested in this particular topic. How many people aren't here, right? Who should be here because they should be getting these messages. So those filter bubbles are one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is that how a message is framed has an impact on how people interpret those messages. I told a story. There's a lot of research on framing. I've done a little bit of it myself. I do research on audiences and the meaning that they derive from messages. And there was a study done in Stanford about it's probably about 6 or 7 years ago now, that looked at crime messages and how, just one little word, it's the same story, But one word in those crime stories about an elevation in crime made a difference in how people thought about the solution to the crime problem. That word was describing it as a beast or a virus. So if crime was described as a beast, people wanted to lock it up. They wanted to, sanctions, right? If it was described as a virus, they wanted to educate people, right? They wanted to start in schools and get in the schools. So just one word in a story can make a tremendous difference in how we perceive those messages. And that's even when you look at people's political preferences. So those kinds of things are important. And then the third way is that the structure of our messages makes a difference. We are fortunate here that we have wonderful, fearless scientists who go out and talk to people about the science, and they care about it, and they talk about it. We have a lot of scientists that I think Ken described as, what did he say? Typically shy away from controversy, right? But how we tell that story is incredibly important. If we stand here and tell you, this is a problem, and this is a problem, and this is a problem, and this is a problem, we're not really going to get very far. Randy Olson, who is, I like to call him a reformed scientist, he was a scientist and then a filmmaker. I think he's still a scientist, but he's also a filmmaker, wrote a book called Houston, We Have a Narrative. And he talks about this, right? That we go from and to, if we tell the story, so but, therefore, right? We have this story arc that tells us, here's a problem, but here are some other things that are affecting that problem. But there are some things that we can do about it. Therefore, when we do those things, these are some of the outcomes that we can reach. So telling that story. Scientists can also become a problem, can have a problem, but become a problem. Yes.
Yeah, we do that already.
Sorry. Scientists can also have a problem, and I have this problem often too when I'm trying to describe my research that's very messy. You talked about the messiness of the research. It is messy, it's complicated, and it's hard sometimes. And so telling that story, when we try to include and, therefore, despite, but, yet, when we do all that, it gets so complicated that people don't want to hear that. So those are some of the problems that I see in terms of the communication, and why, despite all of this wonderful information that we're getting all the time, that people aren't hearing it.
Well, if I may add, it is very true that scientists are not the best communicators, and I think we can all agree to that. But surely we could do better. I mean, there's no question about that. But we have been hurt many times in the scientific community because we just couldn't deliver the message, and that's something that we really need to work hard on. I see a lot of hands, but I believe the gentleman with the orange shirt, if you could.
I want to bring some very good news. My name is Henry Manuel. I'm a retired high school science teacher, chemistry and physics. I've also been part of the Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory for many, many years, where Paul and Ann Ehrlich have been key players. But most of all, I want to say that last year, my wife and I went to a climate change conference in Orlando that was organized by the Florida Interfaith Council. And we had representatives, we had Catholics, we had Lutherans, we had Episcopalians, we had Quakers, we had Baha'i, we had Muslims, we had Jewish folks. We had a whole blend of just about every faith you can think of. And we were not there to argue with each other about various what I like to call theological cul-de-sacs, questions you can't really answer. We were there to focus on this earth and all of the species on it, and to work in a special kind of harmony, it felt like to me, because there were so many different faiths involved. And we spent 3 days together. Had Matthew Fox with us, if any of you ever heard of him. So I came away thinking if we could have more interfaith and less fighting, disagreements between various faiths, it just seemed to be, if people ask me right now, what's my religion? I would say it's interfaith.
Okay, thank you. And I think this gentleman here.
I was very impressed by the comments on how you draw in the public in general, the messaging, how you do various kinds of things. Oh, I forgot the preamble. I'm Frank Leslie. I am a recovering engineer in a 12-step way program that isn't working. And I guess I became an engineer when I was born, but it took me till about age 5 to know that that was what I wanted to do. And I recall back in those days, I'm not quite as old as George, but it was old. And my mother ran across the Superintendent of Documents program. You didn't have to pay for information at that time. And so I recall at a very early age, I was looking at this big table of contents sheet of things you could get, little excerpts on there. And here was this factory, 4 big stacks, smoke pouring out, and reading about the pollution that came there from. And it really affected me quite a bit. I was born in '38. Lots of war issues going on when I was a little kid. I observed my mother cutting both ends out of a tin can and squashing them flat and putting them in a container. And she said, well, that's for the war effort. We're saving metal so that it can be used in other things to support the war effort. And I said something like, well, why don't they just make more metal? And that brings in the embodied energy concept that Diane Burrell used to be heavily involved in. And so there are things of that nature that shapes one's future life. Now, I always worked in the military-industrial complex. One end to the other, Polaris missiles, range tracking ships, all the spooky things going on over at Harris. And finally retired, and I wanted to know more about renewable energy sustainability. That was a long time after I was affected by that. I got involved with Sierra Club, lots of info. And so all this sort of aims towards the generality of commenting. Your presentations tonight were exceedingly good. They were disparate. They played off each other. They had good graphs and good cartoons, Stephen. And you have to appeal to both the intellectual mind and the more, I guess I would say, the graphic mind. And so when you have both combined in a display, that gives people a more likelihood of understanding what your points are. And I was really impressed by it. And the real problem, I think, is that those of us here in this room are just a subset of the population in general. There are those of us who watch National Geographic, or we might watch Nova, et cetera, but there are far more who want to watch Dross, that is the equivalent of Mark and Mindy, let's say.
And how do you get these people who have no idea about conservation, sustainability, to become more involved? Well, you've got to make it personal in some way. And that is the essence. How would you each make something of this nature, something more personal that you could present in a surprise audience almost? They didn't come to hear you, but there you are, and you're talking, and you may get a lot of input.
Right. I mean, thanks for saying that. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've just started talking about in this panel is, and I kind of alluded to it in the talk, was that it's our responsibility to come across, right? I mean, we have to reach out, and this, as I said, it's not about saying, about saying that somebody who disagrees with you is an idiot. This is about being nice, being polite, being respectful, talking to people, and I don't mean in a patronizing way. I mean actually taking them seriously, and finding out what there is in common, having a few laughs, being entertaining, being fun, being passionate about what you do, and just I'm going to just give an example. You have a talk on climate, not this talk, but a shorty up in Vieira, and it was for lifelong learning. And there's a guy who I'm not going to name, but he came loaded for bear on this one, and I just one thing I said was was that I've been reading up on the internet does not make you an expert on climate. That doesn't make you a climate scientist. And the first thing he says, well, I've been reading up on the internet, and everybody started laughing. So it was a perfect hook. And I just, what I did was I just kept on, just saying the most silly, funny, things until he just couldn't help himself. He burst out laughing. And it turned out that we're both from Queens, we have all this stuff in common. And, and he came from, wanting to go after me, and now we got a date for lunch. So, it's just, I mean, that's what you have to do. I mean, this is not about fighting. This is about, you just have to do it. People are not gonna agree with everything you say. Some people are not gonna agree with you at all. But you just have to take your lumps, and you have to move on, and you just have to keep on bouncing back.
We do have quite a few questions. Do you want to?
Okay. Well, I just wanted to speak to my generation's point on that and the communications factor. I think we can all maybe agree, even those in my generation, we're a little distracted. We sometimes have very small attention spans with Facebook or our phones in front of us. And I think the professors can attest to sitting up here that trying to get people to focus on their 50-minute classes is like trying to pull teeth. And I think that for my generation, you do need to go different. You need to be different. And for the general public, big numbers are hard. And I think for the last 3 years, I've actually been working on a book, a novel. And I think disseminating factual information on a novel or entertainment style, not some reality TV show, not some crazy, weird, just totally out there type of genre, but with a real deal climate fiction novel, I think it can work. And I actually brought it. This is the first time I've publicly shown this, but this is it. This is the end of the beginning. This is a book that takes place 10 years from now in a world that is just ours 10 years from now. It's a little warmer, it's a little angrier, and it's a little, the seas have risen, and it's us doing stuff about it because we have no other choice. We reach the point where we go off the cliff or we walk back from it. So I think, and people remember stories. People, when on all these late night talk shows, Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Fallon, they remember this comedy. They remember stories. They remember movies. They say, oh my God, that invoked an emotion from me. And I think doing that for our generation is probably one of the best things that can happen. So,
let me just tell one quick story because the question is more important. I was giving a talk, and there's a fellow in the front row who began to chant, liar, liar, pants on fire, liar, liar, pants on fire. And it was a wonderful moment because it's affected me. And I now start out talks, first with flame retardant, but I start out a talk by writing 3 words on the board. I make mistakes. I acknowledge my fallibility. I hold at arm's length any self-righteousness and say, I make mistakes, but let me tell you how I got to this opinion and why I think that this opinion has some currency. And that helps a great deal. And the fellow that said, liar, liar, pants on fire, looked at me and said, well, maybe you can wear different trousers next time. So perhaps being a bit more self-effacing in these, because, you know, we've all earned our degrees and done our homework and we've made good grades, and it's easy for us to look around with kind of haughtiness. But we do make mistakes. And that's what makes science. It's not about proving things, it's about exploring things and getting, you know, out front with that. It can make a lot of difference in who listens to you and who you listen to.
I think, yes, please go ahead.
My name is Jerry Beekler. I came up from Port St. Lucie, but I'm a retired Miami Beach firefighter. And 10 years ago already, we were going to flooded streets. But one question I have, this occurred mainly on the west side of Miami Beach, West Avenue, Alton, Bay Shore. But it was usually October, King Tide time. I don't know so I have a question, what is King Tide, you know, why does it occur just on a seasonal basis? Also, I have a question about methane. I didn't hear that mentioned much, but I've read where the IPCC doesn't calculate methane into their calculations, and I think that's such a, you know, what's happening on the northern hemisphere, the extreme double warming of the rest of the planet and all the frozen methane there and methane hydrates. I'd like to hear a little bit about that also.
So the problem, I just wanted to reemphasize, so the problem with the going on in Miami and other coastal cities is the increase basically in clear weather flooding, and these are associated with these anomalously high, but these are regular, they come regularly every fall and spring tides basically. And but the increase in the flooding ultimately, so I'm saying these are regular occurrence, part of the longer term tidal cycles. But the point being is that with the sea level rise on top of that now, these fall and spring tides are starting to cause clear weather flooding. So I'm clear about that. So I hope that addressed that issue. I also want to make it obvious that it's not just Miami Beach. There's a pressure head issue, right? It's a funny thing, climate change is here in the sense that basically this is also going on in Miami proper. Things are coming out of the drains, water's coming up, saltwater intrusion's an issue. These are going to happen before these sexy inundation maps when Florida starts disappearing under lots of water. These things are happening now. That's why I mentioned the $500 million basically in infrastructure taxpayer dollars that are going out. So this is an issue. As far as, I'm not sure exactly what you mean about the IPCC and the methane. Certainly when they are running simulations, climate simulations, methane is part of the radiative forcing of these models. So I also read a recent article, I think in Science, about hopefully the melting permafrost, and one of the sources of the methane releases basically. It didn't look like, it looks like anyway, the most recent science on that is not as damning basically. We have enough other problems to worry about in terms of feedbacks. But of course the other problem with methane, more of a problem may be fracking. And the amount of leakage going on with fracking. There are other issues associated with that as well. Clearly, as a greenhouse gas, it's much more powerful for reasons I don't want to get into here in terms of the physics. So that's certainly an issue. Can you be a little more specific about what you mean by the IPCC and?
Well, something I read maybe was misinformation.
The question was is methane in the calculation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it is.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's part of it.
It is a much more powerful greenhouse gas. I think 10 times more.
Yeah.
My name's Ken Gibbs. I'm an adjunct professor in ECE, but that's not my association with climate activity. I got to that degree via studying the ionosphere as a graduate student back in the late 70s and early 80s. And at that time, the big issue for discussion was the hole in the ozone layer. And I just wanted to comment on the communication For those of you who didn't live through that, some of you are too young for that, there was a lot of uncertainty, right? And the public doesn't get uncertainty from science. Even though it's part of science, they don't understand that. So when there was all this discussion of, it's from the cows, it's from the, it's from the fertilizer, it's from the, this, it's from that, SSTs, there were all these different reasons. They were all at one time or the other, the leading cause of the whole Nielsen there. And eventually what we were struggling with is, people took that uncertainty mean they don't know what they're talking about, right? They have no idea what they're talking about. So there's two parts to this. One is convincing them that they know what they're talking about. And I think my recommendation is that the message needs to be not, well, we think it's between here and here. It's more of, it's at least this bad, and that's bad enough, right? And then the next thing that comes into problem, and this was the other side of this issue for the people at the time, was how do we fix it? And because nobody could identify, well, what's the most important thing contributing to this, we couldn't say, well, that's where we need to put our economic dollars. And somebody said, well, you can't tell me what I need to do first, and you don't really know how to fix it. So both of those things, I think, are part of the message problem that we've got to fix for climate change. Thank you.
That's absolutely true. Uncertainty is very difficult for the public, and not having a solution is very difficult. The media have a hard time with that because they want a solution. They want to give a solution, right? How do you report on, we just don't know, right? And so those kinds of, it's very difficult. And journalists are trained to provide certain ask questions, and they want certain answers in return, and that has created a huge disconnect between the scientists who now don't want to talk to journalists because they're afraid of what they're going to say, and journalists who are looking for solutions. They want to report on the solution. So you're absolutely right. Those are real problems that we still have today and are struggling with today.
I think there was yes, go ahead.
Well, I was going to just add one thing.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
It's been pretty kumbaya so far, so I'm not sure I necessarily agree 100% with your point. I think it's pretty obvious. You have to move away from coal. You have to regulate away or price carbon to the point that you move away from coal. I don't think there's any, hoo-ha about that. I think that's pretty well known at this point.
I don't disagree with that, but I think there are people who interpret any uncertainty in our something how quickly we need to move away or how much the effect is, and then they start to say, well, you don't know what you're talking about. You can't tell me exactly what that number is.
That's going to be endemic in any problem. You think about it. Most people react, and they react in the situation of present emergency, right? You can sit there and allow your health to deteriorate over 20 or 30 years and never listen to what a doctor tells you. And one of the problems that works against the solution for something like this is how far out we're talking about the potential benefits that we accrue from doing something about this today. And, even things we were doing with surveying about the lagoon, it's not knowledge that drove people so much, it's the extent that they thought that we were in some kind of panic or tragedy that tends to move them. Calamity moves people.
But that was certainly the experience with oil pollution. It took the Santa Barbara spill and Torrey Canyon off Cornwall to get people interested in double-hull ships. I mean, something bad had to happen, Buzzards Bay. Something bad had to happen before people were willing to act, and it is unfortunate. To another one of your points, it's not just uncertainty that makes the public uncomfortable or squirrely. It's also variability, which is a different thing. Scientists look at don't just look at the average of something, you look at the variability, and the devils and the solutions are in the variability, because of course this is all about extremes. This is not about averages, and so we have to communicate that. We have to find an entertaining, interesting, passionate way to talk about it.
Hi. My name is Abdul. I'm from Libya. I am here. I'm a master's student, but there in my country, I found AYCM, which is the Arab Youth Climate Movement. We did that in 2012 in Cairo, in Egypt. Me and maybe 12 of us at that time. Now we have like more than 20 active offices around the world. It's like 3,000 members work together to talk about climate change and educated our people there about the impact of the climate change. But let me tell you this. I've been in COP 18 in Qatar, Doha, and then COP 19 in Poland. I couldn't go to the embassy, but my friend did. We met a lot of young people from different places, from Europe, from South America, but not a lot of people or young people from United States, or from China, or from Russia. So I think, guys, these three countries is the minor problem for climate change. So we need you. So my friend, I know Zach. He's a very good guy and do a lot of good things here in FIT. I encourage you to increase your voice, not just here in FIT, but in everywhere in the United States. We need you guys. We need your voices. Actually, we do a very good job there, but still we need you. So I hope next COP, that will be, I think, in Germany, in Bonn, I hope see you there and see other people come to talk, because this is our future and we need to fight. So I will be so happy to help you and other people. If you have any question, actually we have our website. You just go to www.aycm.org and you will see a lot of information. We have a lot of partners from South America, from North America, from Canada, from Europe. So I hope this year actually, September I think, will be next COP in Germany, and hope to see you there, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. I would love to go to one of the conferences or parties. That's what COP means, if anybody was wondering. But in terms of, I definitely feel America needs to get in gear a little more. But we're trying here, and I work in the Department of Residence Life here, which has RAs, resident assistants that live in the dormitories with everybody. They do programming for education things such as sexual health, drugs and alcohol, just basic studies of how to go through college. And we've added sustainability to our programming methods, because I think if you get people, when they come here as freshmen, you're going to instill a new culture within them, a new drive to want to be better, to the point of where it's like, just where you think bullying is bad, polluting the earth is bad, to that level. And we have actually brought our business card. This is the Residence Life Sustainability Committee. It's a committee within the Department of Residence Life, run by 18 students right now, all different disciplinaries, all different grade levels, and all those little check marks are the projects that we've undertaken in the last 3 years that we've existed. One of them is the Ethos Community Garden, which we just opened up, the brand new garden in the Residence Quad to promote urban agricultural and sustainability studies right here on campus. What else we got? We got the Leave Green Move Out, which is, we produce a lot of waste. If you've ever been around at the end of the semester, the dumpsters are mountains of trash, unfortunately. And a lot of it's still good stuff. So Leave Green is a movement designed to donate these items to less fortunate individuals in the local area. Last year we collected over 9,000 pounds of stuff. And we donated that to CETA, which is a local Christian chapter that helps educate, I think mostly men after that haven't had really a good time in their life, and try and get them back into society. But this year we're working with Goodwill. So hopefully that will increase our how much we get. And then we have the Live Green Energy Challenge, which I really like because that helps drive down our CO2 emissions. It's an energy conservation challenge amongst the residence halls. This year it was between 2 residence halls as a pilot program. And we've so far been able to save 62 tons of CO2 between 3 buildings alone. So I think that, and I think it was enough power to power 8 average American-sized households. So we're definitely trying. and we're trying to instill it in every student that comes here. So.
As much as this has been a wonderful get-together for tonight, but we have to close it. The library has to close. But we do promise that we will hold more of these events. I think it's actually essential. We talked about what needs to be done. Well, one of those things that needs to be done is to have more of these type of get-togethers, these type of events which are informational, but also to share our experiences and share our thoughts with the community and everyone else who may be interested. And before I say goodnight to you, I wish to thank all our speakers using the scientific term. We had 4 wonderful badass presentations. So with that said, we wish you all a good evening and good night.